Hi, everyone. I want to invite you to open up your Bibles and read Luke 4:14 through 30. It's a long one, but it's a very important passage, one that informs a lot of my theology. So take the time to do that, put me on pause and read. Okay, welcome back. I've shared with you that this is one of my favorite passages from Luke, and that's for a few reasons. First, this is the first sermon that Luke records of Jesus's in the Gospel of Luke. Doesn't mean it's the first one he ever had, because there are other Gospels that imply or have his words, but it's the first sermon recorded in Luke. It shows his clear focus on ministry with the oppressed and the poor and the marginalized. We'll get to that in a minute. And also shows how that without context, some passages can get softened, questions asked to fit our own perception of God instead of what the true context of the passages are. You'll learn a little bit about that. Let me explain. This whole reading is a paradigm of what will happen in the rest of Luke's gospel. Jesus in ministry gets agreement and amazement from the people, and then when they realize what he's really saying, they turn on him. That's a short clip in 14 through 30, but you see it expanded in the Gospel of Luke in Jesus's full 3-year ministry. This is also known as the Nazareth Manifesto because it takes place in Nazareth. Some people call it the Jesus Manifesto, but basically it's about his ministry and proclaims what his ministry is for. So here's what happens in the synagogue when a guest was present. The guest is invited to read and then comment on the reading. You have that, almost like a sermon, a devotional, a commentary, a mishnah, however you want to consider it. But you'll note that sitting down at the end of this was when he would have talked on the commentary. That starts with verse 20 where he says, and he sat down. So the fact that he's a guest could mean that he's from here, but not currently living here. We know that he was raised here, but he has been off somewhere at some point in time. Also note that the scroll is given to him. Each of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible are contained in a different scroll, and the minor prophets are all contained in one called the 12. We don't know if Jesus specifically asked for this one, but we know that he was given this one. What we do know is that he finds the place where it was written. So he purposefully went to this one passage and read. And it says, it reads with the words today. To Luke, that means here it is. He used it also in Luke 2, unto you is born this day. Here is something you've been waiting for, so listen up. Jesus refers to this, and today the word has been fulfilled. I want you to remember that this is something very important. He also says that has been fulfilled in your hearing. The question then becomes, is it just in your hearing or are you really listening? I think it speaks to that. So what exactly does he say and what do we need to hear? How are we reading it correctly? The scroll of Isaiah, a major prophetic voice, and the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. So you remember that Jesus had been moved into the wilderness, had been baptized, filled with the Spirit, moved into the wilderness and went through the temptations, filled with the Spirit. And now here he says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon him. So this is all Spirit led, this commentary and reading the scroll. Again, he found the place where it was written. If you want to go back and read this, it's in chapter 61 of Isaiah. And he reads specifically about good news to the poor, to release the captives, to give sight to the blind. All of these are examples of Jesus's ministry to come and documented in the Gospel of Luke. Now, there's no evidence of him literally releasing captives from prison. He might be talking about, Luke might be documenting what he knows is coming from some exorcisms in his stories later. But in years later, there is plenty of history that shows release of captives actions that grew out of Jesus' ministries, like abolitionists and releasing slaves. And relief to the poor. This is one phrase that can have two different meanings, and sometimes people lean towards the poor in spirit. It makes them more comfortable. But really, that sounds a little bit more like a feel good. And true, I do believe that he's bringing relief from whatever comfort is needed. But the actual relief that we're talking about here and reading from Isaiah is helping the poor among us. That is indicative of Jesus's ministry in Luke, his emphasis on the concern for the marginalized and the oppressed. That's certainly what Isaiah was saying, which we know because of what he's talking about in verse 19. Verse 19 here says that it references the year of the Lord's favor. That's a specific reference to the year of Jubilee that comes from Leviticus 25. It happens after every seventh Sabbath year. Sabbath year is every seventh year. So it happens in year 50. 7 times 7 is 49, plus 1 is 50. And it's that year of Jubilee is a complete reset, the economic reset that is referenced in Leviticus. We forgive all debts, we free all the slaves, and we return land to the rightful owner. That's what Leviticus 25 says. The scripture is fulfilled. He didn't come right out and say that he was the Messiah, but the reading of the scroll combined with this word, I've been anointed, certainly sets up a messianic message here. And then what they say is that all were amazed. They spoke well of him. This is Joseph's son, right? We're amazed at this. So how is it that he has so much knowledge and meaningful proclamation and commentary? And Jesus replies with two things: physician, heal thyself, and that no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Both suggest that they're questioning about being Joseph's son and having these abilities. Jesus is saying that they are too close to the situation and can't see past what they knew of him and what they knew of Joseph in Jesus's younger years. It's really hard to accept. You go back and you see people who have grown up and now they're in their 20s, and the last time you saw them were in their teens or even in elementary school. It's really hard to accept one of our own or someone that we knew as being out of the ordinary. And yet here's Jesus identifying as a prophet, even as the Messiah. And he continues to say, Jesus continues to say that his ministry is not just for his hometown, but also for others. And he says that through these examples, that he references Elijah and Elisha, prophets who turned to the Gentiles and helped the Gentiles. One who helped an obscure widow and her son, and another who helped the commander of the enemy army. This would be well known to the people of Nazareth. But this reinforces Luke's universalization, that he makes it universal of the gospel. Now, remember, Luke is writing in a time much later. He's not writing it in the moment. He's writing it much later in an organized effort to explain what had gone on in the stories that he'd heard. So he already knows what's going to happen. He knows that the gospel is going to be spread to the Gentiles. And so he builds that into this. He's writing to a Greek audience. Many churches have already been established in the Gentile areas: Colossia, Corinth, Ephesia. And recall that Luke is writing an orderly account. He's heard the ending and continues that story here. So in verse 25 to 27, he points out to miracles from the past by Elisha and Elijah. And Luke includes similar miracles in the future that Jesus matches, doesn't intend to, I don't think, but he matches to those, the water and sharing with Elisha. He references those by Jesus in chapter 5 and chapter 7. So we'll get to that as well. So the question then becomes, why are people so upset? Well, it's twofold. First, that Jesus is now proclaiming that God is for all. that God is not just for the people of Nazareth, not just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles as well. That the Gentiles are a part of God's love and included in the fulfillment. Does that sound familiar? That the people of Nazareth would want to purposely exclude some people from the gospel story, or from being loved by this God that they have been worshiping. I can see some similarities now. So what do? They say, let's throw them off a cliff. So now they're a lynch mob. And somehow Jesus escapes that. We don't know how he did, and we don't know where he went. But if you look at Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, there's indication that he was preaching and ministering in the area of Capernaum. And so there's speculation that possibly he relocated to Capernaum, which would coincide with that, with the teaching of Matthew. So there's some questions for reflection today. And the biggest one for me is, what does it do for you knowing that that release of the captives and ministry with the poor is bringing comfort to the poor, setting the captives free? It's not just it's not necessarily an individual thing that gets softened in today's proclamation. The origin of this is actually to set the people free, to liberate them from their poverty. We can talk about they are also spiritually poor, but you cannot ignore that the year of Jubilee is an economic release, that they're free of debts, that they're free of, that they get reinstituted in their land, and that all the slaves are free. So what does that do to your interpretation and your understanding of these passages? Another question, why would Luke give this story such prominent placement as the first documented sermon? What do you think was Luke's message here? What was his message, and what was his attempt in including this particular story of Jesus's proclamation of Isaiah? So there's no evidence that the year of Jubilee was actually practiced, at least not the 50-year Jubilee. We don't have any indication that it was ever put into practice. So my question for you, and I really encourage you to put comments here in the video link here, and on Facebook and Instagram. My question to you is, so how do we practice Jubilee? How do we practice it daily? How do we live a life that is intended for the year of Jubilee? And the last question, I want you to think about the prejudice that are occurring here. The Nazarenes basically are saying, I love all that, but not for everybody else. They're stating that Jesus's ministry should be contained and specialized for their own benefit, for only the select few, or at least not for those Gentiles. How might we be making that same claim today? Who are we excluding from God's love? Who are we excluding from God's goodness? I truly believe that every person is created good, with goodness in them, and that every person is loved by God. So ask yourself, and look around to what prejudices might be there today that we are possibly not including people into the family of God. All of these questions and this particular passage just very welcome to me, and certainly help form my theology. I'd be happy to talk more if you want to add some questions, or consider some other, just consider other things if you want to comment in the comment section.